Ready, genius.
Welcome back to the Urban Originals podcast. If you've been listening from episode 1 through now, you probably picked up on a few themes I keep circling back to. Cities, careers, systems, the way people move through environments that weren't designed with them in mind. Today I want to talk about a distinction that's been useful for me to sit with. The difference between building inside a city and consuming a city. Not in a moral way, not as a hierarchy, just two very different ways of moving through the same place. Most of us start out as consumers. We move somewhere for what it offers us. The energy, the culture, the lifestyle, the version of ourselves we get to try on in that environment. That's part of the experience of living in cities, and there's nothing wrong with it. But at some point, something shifts for a lot of people. The city stops being a backdrop and starts becoming a place you're actually trying to build something within. Your work gets heavier, your responsibilities expand, you start paying attention to how things actually move instead of just what's happening on the surface. That's usually when people begin to notice systems. Not just vibes, not just scenes, not just the parts of the city that show up in marketing. The real machinery underneath. Who decides what? How access works? Where friction comes from? Why some doors open easily for certain people and feel invisible to others? Builders move differently through cities because they're paying attention to those layers. Not because they're smarter, but because they're trying to move something forward. When you're trying to build, you eventually run into constraints, processes, institutions, history. You start to see how much of what feels personal is actually structural. Being in engineering school has sharpened that lens for me. You start learning to step back from outcomes and look at what the system is incentivizing. What inputs are being rewarded? What trade-offs are being built into the design? Cities work the same way. They produce predictable results based on structures most people never see. There's a moment a lot of people hit where the city stops feeling magical. The novelty phase, routine settle in, and you start noticing the unevenness. Who gets access early? Who has to wait? Which opportunities are visible? And which ones exist quietly in the background. Some people get discouraged at that point. Others get curious. That curiosity is usually the beginning of building something real inside the environment you're in. I've also been thinking about this podcast in that same frame. The solo episodes are me thinking out loud, processing what I'm seeing, what I'm learning in real time, and what questions keep coming up for me. Especially being in grad school and moving through systems that look clean on paper but feel messy in practice. Sometimes something from class sits with me. Sometimes it's a pattern I notice in leadership or decision making. Those moments feel worth capturing, even if I don't have a clean answer yet. At the same time, there are people who lived experiences adds texture to those questions. People who've had to carry leadership, make trade-offs, navigate institutions, and deal with the parts of city's life that don't make it into highlight reels. I'll start weaving those perspectives in when it makes sense. Not as a shift away from solo episodes, just as another layer of the same conversation. So you might hear me sit with a question about leadership one week, and later bring someone in who's had to live that reality inside an organization. Or I might talk through how decisions feel from the outside of a system, then eventually have a conversation with someone who's been on the other side of that table. The format stays flexible because the thinking is still evolving. The through line doesn't change. The point of this show is to make the invisible parts of city life, work, and leadership a little more visible. To give language to things people feel, but don't always have words yet. Sometimes that happens through solo reflection. Sometimes it happens through conversation. Both belong here, and that's the lane I'm staying in. the Urban Originals podcast.